Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the worst card designs of the 1950s. The 1950s was an interesting time for card design because they were still trying to figure it out, but they also started off with a very particular mentality about how cards would work, and then they kind of evolved it over time across two companies. Bowman is really the company that started it all out, and then it kind of gave way to Topps in partially a relationship and partially a transition from one company to another. So the card designs, there are a couple of different ideas they came up with, and it's interesting to see the really good stuff they came up with, and it's also kind of interesting to see the stuff that would need a lot of work. And I'm going to be looking at the cards that needed a lot of work, but what's really interesting is that the card designs actually tended to be better earlier in the decade than later. A very unique quality to this decade. And in looking the worst card designs, I like to start off with an honorable mention. And in this case, I'm actually going to start off with a tie. Two cards that I think that both of them really kind of failed, which is unfortunate because they failed in different ways, which it creates an interesting quality to the fact that you look at these two cards and they affect you in different ways. I don't think either of them are terrible, but I don't think that either of them are good at all. So I'm going to start off with 1959 Topps Baseball. And with this card, it looks like it's in a supermarket. It looks like a box of laundry detergent. I mean, it really does. It's very much of the period. It looks like an advertisement trying to advertise something with a big, exciting whatever. It's got this circle that has the subject in the middle, and then it has this big, bold color for the whole rest of the area with some bold text. It's kind of busy and it's overly flashy, and there's no relationship between the outside and the inside. So to me, this looks more like a laundry detergent ad that's showing the clean uniform inside. I don't like the contrast. I don't like how bold the card is to the actual image, which actually is a good image, and that's where I have the issue. If they spent more time appreciating the image, which Topps had often been doing with baseball cards around this time, the card would have worked a lot better, but it got in the way by overpowering it. Similarly, in 1957, they also, for their baseball set, did the exact opposite. And in this case, the card is all about the image, which is great. It's a great image. The problem is that they have this text down at the bottom that is distracting. It has two tones. It is not text that works in the artistic way with the rest of the card. And so every time I look at this card, I don't see the image. I see the text at the bottom, and it cheapens it, and it bothers me because while in one case I'm saying, why is the card in the way? Just give me an image. Here, I have an image, and I'm saying, I can't see the image because of some little detail. And that's what really bothers me. I really want to like this card, but every time I look at the card, the text at the bottom grabs my eye and holds it, and it prevents me from being able to enjoy the card. So they kind of ruined it. And while technically the 57 card is a lot better than the 59, I gotta say it is a huge letdown for me. That's really the key. It's too much of a letdown. So these two are cards that are almost terrible. They're not quite. They are disappointments. But as far as the top five or the bottom five of the decade, I'm starting off with 1954 Bowman Football. And this is a card that this was when they were making large format cards. So that was a good thing about these cards. And they have a lot of room for the image. I kind of like the banner down at the bottom. That's kind of nice. The problem I have is that the image is kind of washed out. And this is a strange situation where I think the image could be a lot better if they had made a better quality card. But it feels old. But it doesn't feel old in a good way. It feels old in a quirky sort of, yeah, well, that was before they knew how to do anything good kind of a way. It wouldn't be that big of a problem if this was just the way that Bowman was at the time, but just a few years earlier, they were making spectacular cards. They looked gorgeous. And with this one, to me, it always feels like a letdown. It feels a little bit too washed out. It doesn't feel well structured. It doesn't have any interest to it. And so for me, it's always halfway. It's not quite successful. And I'm probably a little bit too hard on this card because I am a football card collector. And so when I look at this card, every time I do, I just think, you really blew it. And that's kind of my attitude about this. They really blew it with this card. Other than that, it's not a terrible card. It's just, it is a letdown. So that's, for me, my number 5. And for my number 4, I'm going back over to baseball. This is Bowman Baseball, 1955. And in this case, they went with a gimmick. They went with a TV set design. This is, I believe it's the first time that anybody had done this for a card design. It wasn't done very often. But Topps did one of these in the 1960s with football, because football was now being shown on television. So they did it as a celebration, and those cards actually looked pretty good because they knew how to design the card pretty well so that it read well. In this case, it's the card design that is the problem. It's a nice idea, but the way that a TV works, TVs are like speakers. You don't need the box. The box is a helpful component for you got to put it somewhere. You got to protect it from being damaged. And so you build a box around it, but you can mount it into the wall or wherever you want to mount the actual device. It's just a screen. That's what it is, the screen, the components behind. So what they do is they build a box, and they take the screen and they build a mount around the outside. So the mount is the interface between the screen and the box on the outside. It's basically the way that a mat works when you're framing pictures. And so you have this mount around the outside, you have the box on the outside, and that's all it is. And so wood paneling was the way that they did their boxes back at this time. So here you have an image in the middle, and it's kind of rounded off, and then you have the mount around the outside, which kind of mats it, and then you have the wood paneling on the outside of all that, and that is the way that the card is designed. And it's a decent idea. The two problems I have with it are the fact that the mount is very powerful and it really grabs your eye. But the bigger issue for me is that the wood paneling around the outside is the wrong scale. It's about the right scale for the card, but not for a television. So whenever I look at it, it looks like a really cheap version of cheap wood paneling. It's a cheap version of cheap. That's not a good direction to go. Now, if this was actually the correct size, so if this was an actual cell phone size TV, then it would actually be kind of cool. And actually, I don't know why nobody has done one of these wood paneled TV boxes for a cell phone just as like a little joke. It'd be a really cool thing for somebody to do. But for a card, it doesn't look like a TV set, and that always throws me off. Plus, it's really dark. And then I look down at the bottom and I see this little panel, it looks like a plaque. So I'm expecting to see the player name down there, but I don't. Instead, that's the dials. So even at that point, it kind of throws me off. And so this card basically just annoys me. That's really the problem. There's nothing about it that looks good, in my opinion. It's just kind of there. It's a rough creation that I think they really could have hammered out. But this is what they came up with. And so this, for me, is my number 4. My number 3 is 1952 Baseball by Topps. And this Topps set is kind of the first Topps set. They had done another one before, which looks almost more like a game, but with this one, these cards were the first actual cards that Topps made front and back for baseball. And I hate the cards. Now, the image on the card is, I'm not going to go into that. For me, it's all about that little box down at the bottom with the name. All those little yellow dots around the outside. It looks cheap. It looks frustratingly cheap. To me, it always grabs my eye, throws me off. And right at the same time, Bowman was making fine art. In 1952, they were doing these amazing cards with art, and here this was the exact opposite. This looked like Topps had no idea what they were doing, which, let's be honest, they didn't. They had a long way to go, but to me, it screams out that they have no idea what they're doing. So that's the issue that I have with this card. I might be too hard on it simply because it is the first one for Topps, but at the same time, I'm just talking about what is good and what's bad, and they had a long way to go with the 52. For my number 2, I'm going back over to football to Bowman again for 1953. And the 1953 cards, this is one I definitely am going to be hard on because in this case, it's a large format card again. They actually have a really good image in it. It's not necessarily great images per se, but the way that these images come through, they look like high quality photographs. And that's what I love about the card. The problem is that big stupid football down at the bottom. And the big football takes up a lot of space, and it's white with black lines, which to me, it looks like it's pasted on. Like some kid took a picture and then cut out a little football and glued it on and said, hey, I got a card. And for that kid, hey, congratulations, you did a good job. For a professional company, especially with what Bowman had been doing, to me, this card just screams out amateur. And all-time amateur. I mean, this card really bothers me. And it's a shame because I have to take a second and really look at the picture to realize, wow, hey, that's a good picture. I never see the picture. I don't care about the picture. The pasted on quality of that football just throws me off. So I have to put this down here too. I don't want to. I'd like to find an excuse not to, but I can't. I can't avoid it. The fact is, this is the year when Bowman really blew it in football. And I would say that this was about as bad as it could get in this decade, except in 1958, Topps totally topped that with their football set, where in this card design, they have a couple of different borders. And so I admit this is not the best color border, but the way that this card is designed is so lackluster. It uses, kind of like the first one, the 1959 baseball set I mentioned, it uses a punched hole so you're looking through at an image behind. That's the design approach that they take. And every once in a while, if I think about that, I can actually see it as a whole with something behind. And so I can get away with appreciating the actual image, but for the most part, the border is too bold. And it's not just that it's too bold, there's nothing in it anywhere up above. So the 1959 baseball set I have as an honorable mention because it does have stuff in the border, which makes the whole border feel better and the card reads a lot better. In the case of football, this looks to me like an amateur card that was created right at the end of the 80s and early 90s. A bunch of people were making cheap cards that they just print off and then they would sell them at card shows, and a lot of people were collecting them because they're super rare. There are only 500 of them, but they weren't official cards. That's what this has always looked like to me. I've always looked at this and gone, well, that's just, it's a knockoff. That's what it is. But no, that's actually the card. And that's why I hate this card so much, is the fact that every time I look at it, I go, why did they design a card that looked that bad? But that's what they did. So I got, this to me is, it's one of those all-time terrible cards. And again, just like I'd said with Bowman, leading up to this, Topps have been making really good football cards. This one is just an absolute mess. So that is my list of the bottom 5 cards of the 1950s. This is as bad as it gets as far as I'm concerned. And I'm really curious your thoughts about what I'm too hard on and what I should have put on this list. Definitely let me know. And I'll be doing the best of the 1950s later on, so definitely check out that video when it comes out and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.